Welcome to another episode of the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour Podcast with your host, Andrew Langer.
Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Lunch Hour with Federal Newswire. I'm your host, Andrew Langer. And if you're watching us on our YouTube channel, you know you can always take us with you when you're out there, out and about, and you want to listen to us wherever fine podcasts are found. If you're listening to us on one of those fine podcast platforms, please take a look at us on YouTube as well. Leave a review, leave a thumbs up, a rating, tell your friends, tell your family members, friends, and your friends' family members all about the Lunch Hour, the good work we're doing. Joining me today, I'm very excited. Actually, this is historic. We're now just over a year into the Lunch Hour, and this is the first time we have a return guest. His name is
fantastic.
Paul Teller. I'm so excited.
Good to see you. That's great.
His name is Paul Teller. He's Dr. Paul Teller. He's Executive Director of Advancing American Freedom. He has spent 2 decades as a leader and organizer in the conservative movement. After spending 16 years on Capitol Hill in various leadership roles. In fact, I was just telling folks about your elevator shaft office.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
He worked as the executive director of the Republican Study Committee and worked for Senator Ted Cruz. He most recently served as a liaison to conservatives in the House and Senate and to conservative policy stakeholders for a guy you might know. His name is President Donald J. Trump exactly. And Vice President Mike Pence. He holds his bachelor's degree from Duke University and his PhD from American University. Paul,
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So glad we can have you back.
Good to see you. Great to be back.
Now, listen, when we're recording this, and a lot of folks don't know this, so I'm going to spill the beans.
Okay.
We do these things asynchronously. So we record episodes and then we release them down the road.
Right.
As it happens, today is kind of, the last 24 hours have been kind of extraordinary on the issue of border policy. But, so before we get to those extraordinary, what has happened with the Biden administration, before yesterday, last evening, and we were sort of talking about you coming on and talking about this, you really wanted to come on and rightfully talk about border security. What's been going on at the border? Why is it so important for us to be talking about this?
Well, I tell you, what's amazing to see, and we'll get it, we'll dig in on all these issues, but what's been so stunning, I think, for the conservative movement to see is how the left in big cities, Chicago, New York, et cetera, is just absolutely freaking out. It's something they invited into their living rooms. They said, please, come here. You're an illegal immigrant. We got you. We'll take care of you. We'll house you. We'll clothe you. We'll give you health care, et cetera, et cetera. And they said, okay. So, you got to take yes for an answer. So I think that's made so much of it an elevated crisis, if you will. It was a crisis before. But now when it's affecting left, right, and center, not just the southern central part of our nation, but, the Northeast, the Midwest, all of a sudden it truly is a national problem, whereas maybe before it was more regional.
Milton Friedman was right, and we're sort of seeing it bear out, that if you have unrestricted migration and you have a massive social welfare state, that's the surest way to bankrupt a society. I'm reminded of this, and actually let's pull it back into general public policy. And the work that you did up on the Hill for 16 years, the work that you did for President Trump and Vice President Pence, the work you're doing at Advancing American Freedom. I have an adage that I use. It's called, the most well-intentioned policies eventually bump up against very real realities. My father simplified it. He said, Andrew, there are many roads to utopia. However, all must traverse the surface of the earth. This is what we're seeing right now, isn't it, with regards to this immigration policy?
No, 100%, right? Because I think what the left, was hoping for would be some would come in and look, most of those who would come in would be Democrat voters, liberal activists, et cetera, makes them feel good. But I think they never really anticipated that when you're kind of offering, free ice cream at the playground, you're going to get a lot of kids coming to your playground.
But so let's pull it back, though, because this seems to be a theme with regards to Democrat policies or progressive policies. Let's not put a partisan label on it. Let's put on it the statist label or the big government label, that they don't understand the concept of unintended consequences and that intentions don't matter in the end. It's the consequences that do, isn't it?
Yeah, no question. No question. And what we're also seeing is just a breakdown of the rule of law.
Right.
I mean, and the irony of that too, right? Because so many of these, the more well-meaning immigrants who are coming just for a better life, they're coming because they're in countries that have no rule of law. And the irony of the first thing they do when they get to American soil is break our rules, break our laws. It's just horrible.
It's interesting because, your degree is in political science. My degree is in international relations. And I get it. I get the idea. We need to go and we need to fix the problems that are there, or we need to be working with these countries to create a climate that fosters civil society, right?
Yeah.
Which is a huge deal with our folks in the political science world, especially those of us on the conservative side of the aisle. We believe in civil society, but that doesn't preclude us from dealing with the crisis that's happening now. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, no question. I mean, I think what you're also seeing is, a total disregard for, like we said, first of all, the rule of law, but a total disregard really for just the incentives that you create with these policies. When you lose the rule of law, when you open a border, you're incentivizing obviously 100%. More to come. And part of that travel, up through Central America, Mexico, or wherever else folks are coming from, has involved, of course, sex trafficking, drugs, illegal weapons trafficking, you name it. And all of that flows from this total disregard for the rule of law.
It's, we come to this point where it's Katie bar the door. And at least talk a little bit more about the Trump administration, Trump-Pence administration. Yeah. Very important to say that. The Trump-Pence administration track record when it came to what they were doing on the border in terms of border security.
And that's the thing. And I think even some of the most at least let's just say if you're an honest liberal, you'll still agree with this. How much better things were under Trump-Pence in terms of immigration. I mean, you're talking about, I think it was a 90% reduction in illegal immigration, which then also meant a dramatic reduction in the sex trafficking that we were talking about, in just the violence and the enriching of the cartels that happened. All of that was down. And part of I think the biggest, I mean, there's lots of it. Some of it was the building of, I think, 450 miles of border wall. But some of it was something that actually Vice President Pence negotiated, the Remain in Mexico policy.
Talk about that, because that's what I want to. Why is that such an essential element here? Why is it important to have folks come over the border and be here? Talk about that.
No, that's right. Because right now what's happening is, the second an illegal immigrant gets his or her foot, onto American soil, they say, oh, well, sorry, I guess you're here. We'll let you go wherever you need to. We'll even help you resettle. And I'm sure you'll come back for your hearing, your asylum hearing or whatever you're requesting, in X number of months, maybe even years, that kind of thing. Under Trump-Pence, it was, I tell you what, that's great. But instead of waiting for your asylum hearing in Chicago, New York City, Dallas, wherever else, you're going to be waiting, somewhere in Mexico.
Right, of course.
And the truth is, this is the thing that the left can't get their heads around. Asylum doesn't just mean you're having a bad life, you want to move somewhere else. It's supposed to be, your life is in danger. You're an imminent threat. And then you could seek asylum here. So if you're in Mexico and no longer an imminent threat, if you're hanging out in Mexico City or wherever else you're hanging out, that should satisfy, the needs of asylum, but not for the left.
As we talk about this, right? Because you've got Governor Hochul up in New York, who wants to give work permits to people, has given work permits to people. I mean, again, we didn't see that happening. Why is it that they can't get work permits in Mexico to do these? Talk.
No, exactly, and that's the thing. And part of the negotiation was Vice President Pence, went down to Mexico and said, look, I'm delivering a message from the president. I mean, I'll work with you directly here, but I'm delivering that. And the message is, if you don't help us out here, if you don't stop people from coming through your country and coming up illegally into ours, we're going to slap a massive tariff on everything coming into the United States. Now, again, is that fantastic trade policy? No. And frankly, the president and vice president knew that, but you use it as a stick to encourage the Mexican government to say, oh, you know what, maybe I don't want to work with the cartels in this moment, and we're going to stop some of this flow.
Let's talk about, again, pulling it back to the 30,000 foot level on public policy generally. And let's talk about, your work up on the Hill as a staffer, Republican Study Committee, staff leader. Talk about the issue of sticks and carrots in terms of public policy and creating incentives. What's the balance? I mean, obviously the balance changes depending on the issue, but talk about these as tools to sort of push public policy forward.
Well, no, you're exactly right, and you're right to say that it does depend on the actual issue. But in certain cases, you want to work a little bit with sugar and kind of say, let's work together. I'll give you this if you give me that, no problem, whatever. The problem is when, as in the case, with Mexico and illegal migration, when the other player, the other actor doesn't quite have the incentive to be nice, right? In the case of the Mexican government, they're making a lot of money working with the cartels and actually enabling some of this traffic to come through their country and stuff like that. And so in that case, you are going to need a stick to say, we're going to cut off that flow, the money that you're making, not only from the illegal immigration, but frankly, even just from business with the United States, we're going to reduce that.
It's interesting you talk about this because we could then extend that to the political negotiations between the parties while President Trump was president, Vice President Pence was vice president.
Yeah.
The issue of the Democrats felt that, increasing or ensuring greater numbers of it, right? No person is illegal. There's no such thing as an illegal person. That's not a conservative value. It's not a Republican value. It's a Democrat. It's a progressive value, because they believe cravenly that they can make up whatever shortfall in voters that they have. Whatever we go down that road, it becomes. There's a thread here. I promise you.
Okay, no problem. Yeah.
It becomes a problem to then negotiate things like immigration reform or finding a solution to the issue of DACA. Things that President Trump wanted to do and Vice President Pence wanted to do, but when the other side is not willing to deal, honestly, to talk about that.
100%. Two totally different goals, right? I mean, that's the thing, which is why I think it's an interesting moment that you opened up with, right? That maybe, just maybe, left and right are converging in terms of the ultimate goal. In other words, even some on the left are starting to say, maybe the goal should be fewer people coming across the border. And that's an amazing moment.
As we're talking about this, and let me be really clear about this. As we're talking about this, it was announced that Secretary Mayorkas is calling for a building of a wall.
Incredible.
And that is especially given, this is a repudiation of years of Democrats saying that walls don't work. We could talk about why that they do.
Yeah. But the brand of a wall, right, is so Donald Trump.
Absolutely. But talk about this. I mean, that's why we're at this moment. We know. I mean, I guess some of us could have predicted that there was going to be some kind of an inflection point.
Yeah.
But honestly, I never thought that Mayorkas would turn around and say, were you?
Right. And first of all, also we should, trust but verify, to use the Reagan song, right? So when they say, I don't even know if they use the word wall, maybe.
No, they said barriers, yes.
Right. So, does that mean, blowing up a couple of rubber duckies and putting them in the wall? I don't know, right? It's hard to know what they actually mean by that.
That's a good point.
But let's assume they mean something that will actually stop the flow in that immediate local area. Incredible, because it is a concession to our side that we were right, that we were not mean about it either. They said such terrible things about our intentions, and it's like, you put up a fence around your house doesn't mean you're mean. It just means you don't necessarily want people coming across your property willy-nilly.
Listen, you lock your car doors. Even though somebody can reach in and break your window, you still lock your car doors in case somebody wants to just open up the door.
No question.
Very, very simple and straightforward.
No,
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and actually, so a colleague of mine, Ben Crosby, and I did an actual border trip visit between McAllen and Laredo, Texas, a couple months ago. We even got to ride down the center of the Rio Grande River, which, by the way, I didn't know this until I was there. The border between U.S. and Mexico runs down the middle of the water.
Sure.
So depending on what part of the river you're on, could be U.S., Mexico, U.S., Mexico. And we were warned, do your best to stay on that U.S. side of the water. Even if you're in the Mexico water, all of a sudden cartels could, look at you a little differently. But, the thing that we saw is people, and you see this on TV, people are just coming in from anywhere, through the bushes, through fences. I mean, it's just, a physical barrier is absolutely needed to stop folks.
A big issue on my radar screen. And then I went down to the Imperial Dunes National Monument, and this is 15 plus years ago. I was still lobbying for NFIB. I went down as a favor to a lobbyist we both know who was working with some recreational folks down there.
Okay.
And to get to the Imperial Dunes, you either fly into Phoenix and drive west, or you fly into one of the airports west of LA and you drive east. And either way, you're driving along I-10, you're driving along the border, and there is no fence. There is nothing there. And this is during the George W. Bush administration, I believe. It must have been. And I'm watching people just cross the border. Now, as it was, you had a Wackenhut bus that would pick folks up, Wackenhut being a contractor that was contracted with these guys. But it was a bus that would, pick folks up as they drove in to take them to be brought. But I'm sitting here going, somebody gets picked up by somebody else. They don't get picked up by one of these buses. These people just coming in. A radio friend of mine, John Justice, used to be on in Tucson, told me about this. I swear to God, there's a point to the story, Paul.
No, yeah, all good.
So told me when I was going in to do an event with John in Tucson. This is years ago. And I flew into Phoenix and I was driving down.
Yeah.
And he said, whatever you do, don't stop in X town. I don't remember the name of the town, but it was basically at the intersection of whatever the interstate is that runs between Phoenix and Tucson.
Yeah.
And then I-5 was also there. And then it was at the end of this valley. I'm drawing stuff on the table. For those of you who are listening and not saying, there's the end of this valley that comes up. And you remember that Raul Grijalva wants extended wilderness along the border there. Again, so the cartels apparently are in charge of this town because folks can come up and they can easily disperse them. I mean, again, it's a scary prospect here. Talk about that. Talk about, if you want, Grijalva and making wilderness territory on the border and how that's an issue.
Well, you know, and see, that's actually something that doesn't get talked about a lot either is, you know, the different types of land that come right up to the border, right? Some are wilderness, some are, you know, just general government land, whatever. Right. But some of it is private property.
Yeah,
I mean, we're talking people's private ranches, their homes, their businesses are pretty much right up, you know, to the border. So when the cartels are bringing folks over, they're just stomping right across property. We even heard a story of a rancher who just says, and this apparently is not a rare thing, but he said that, if you encounter kind of a cartel guy, especially carrying kids or women with him or that kind of thing, you're best to kind of look the other way.
Sure, of course.
Either pretend you don't see him or indicate to him that I see you, but I'm looking the other way.
Yeah, got
because they make it clear, like, we know where you live. We know where your family lives.
Right.
Your house is right there. Your daughter bathes over there. All these horrible things. Yeah. And yet you just are supposed to absorb that. And, you know, it's absolutely horrifying.
And yet it's one of these situations where you get folks like the governor of Texas, you know, not necessarily the governor of New Mexico, the governor, you know, but you get folks. I was going to say, the governor of Texas, then not the governor of New Mexico, not Arizona, and not California. But the point is, the governor of Texas tries to do something about this, or officials, and
somehow he's the bad guy.
He's the bad guy,
which is terrible.
Yeah, I mean,
and here's the thing too, like when we were on the border trip, everyone we talked to just talked about how much the people getting the most raw end of the deal out of this are children. Right. That they're used as pawns. You know, the cartel knows that you come across with a kid, you claim that child is yours or your nephew or whatever. And it's just a little bit harder for, you know, American officials to kind of turn that away.
You know, it's interesting. I got this question the other morning. I did a stint on John's show. And I didn't have an answer to this. I don't claim to be an expert on these things. When folks come across fingerprinted, DNA tested, any idea of what kind of processing is done? I mean, you may not know.
Yeah, I'm not sure the exact details. Yeah. I don't think it's much. From what I understand, it would surprise me if there was.
Yeah. I mean, beyond fingerprinting, and even then, you know, you get. And listen, I'm a huge civil libertarian. I believe in civil liberties, but I don't think there's anything wrong with making sure that when somebody comes across the border, I don't think it violates anybody's civil liberties if you take a DNA swab and you take a fingerprint. I mean, that's.
Well, and here's the thing, too. Another reason why that might be good if they're not already doing it is we heard a lot of stories of how some of these folks that they catch coming across with kids in tow are themselves sex offenders.
That's what I'm saying, yeah.
So, I mean, these are sex offenders. They've got 4 kids with them. These are my kids. Yeah, we're going to see Aunt so-and-so in Toledo. Really? Yes. You know, we can unfortunately bet of what's actually happening to those kids, and it's horrifying. So
it is amazing. Let's talk a little bit more about you know, you had DeSantis, you had Abbott. They were both criticized for making this a national issue.
Yeah,
not criticized by folks on the right, and they were. It was dismissed by the media as being a political gimmick.
Yeah,
but again, policy matters.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about this.
Well, again, they invited it,
right?
You know, one thing if you know these shipments of you know legal immigrants were to places that said, "I'm sorry, we're not accepting."
Sure.
When they said, you know, bring them, that kind of thing. And actually, the Martha's Vineyard example is a perfect example because you know. Whether I should admit this to your conservative viewers or not, I'm a regular Martha's Vineyard vacationer.
We know that, Paul.
Right? I'm kind of out there about that.
You're a limousine liberal.
That's right. So, you know, literally last 20-something years every summer. So know the island well. Pull out a map. Anyone can pull out a map. The center of Martha's Vineyard, the island of Martha's Vineyard, is just a big forest.
Yeah.
Nobody lives there. They could have put tents in there, maybe built some little homes, cleared some trees, and made room for those, what was it, 25,
something like that,
50 immigrants. Plenty of room there.
Right.
Even
taking them into their houses.
Right.
Which is,
even if you want to hold that aside, it's okay. Yes, there's rooms in the mansions that are in some parts of the island, but okay, that's private homes, whatever. You could have done government housing in this forest in the middle of the, but nope, sorry, we have no room here. Yeah. So, I mean, it's the hypocrisy was
Parks closed,
stunning.
Moose outside should have told you. Yeah, that was my immediate reaction to this.
Yeah, just stunning.
It makes it, I mean, I think that's, it generally, again, sort of getting back to the general policy issues. One of the problems that not we have, but maybe in terms of the articulation, is that when you have progressives calling for greater levels of regulation or disarming the population and not allowing people to be empowered to act on their own behalf, in the end, they don't have to live with those rules.
Exactly right.
Talk about this as an incentive on the part of the left.
No, 100% goes back to that rancher that we met with, right? I mean, you've got cartels and other illegals, folks coming across your property, passing by your house where you sleep, your family sleeps, your animals are kept if you have, that kind of property. And yet then you're being told by, liberals in, Northeast homes with, ADT home security cameras and, maybe you live on the 12th floor of an apartment building, which is, less likely to be crossed by criminals because you're 12 stories up. You're being told you can't have a weapon to defend yourself, defend your family, defend, just the right to have a border on your property and have no one walk across it without your permission. Just outrageous.
I mean, and that applies in so many other areas. It's not just the national security, the border security issue, but in terms of environmental issues and general land and natural resources policy. We've had a bunch of conversations about that, where you have, somebody in New York or California making a decision as to what happens to somebody in Pocatello, Idaho. Yeah, and they don't have to live with those consequences. Yeah, let's just shift gears for a little bit, and advancing American freedom. We've talked a little bit about AAF in the past. What are you guys up to these days?
Yeah, no, appreciate it.
You have this piece of paper
in fact,
here.
Yeah, I guess, the future of freedom.
Yes.
So Future Freedom, it's a legislative offshoot of our freedom agenda.
Good.
And so for your readers, and we can get you the link if you'd like, we created this freedom agenda that is basically a menu of all kinds of options for restoring freedom in America, federal level, state level, civil society, private life, anything. Just how do you bring back freedom in America, in accordance with our name? We figured if you're going to be named Advancing American Freedom, you better have a roadmap for advancing American freedom. And that's it. And then the Future of Freedom, again, we said it's one thing to have, a little bit higher brow policy prescriptions in the freedom agenda. Let's dig in and say, okay, how do you put those into legislative format? And so it's not that we've written hundreds of bills, but we say so-and-so has written a bill. Senator Mike Lee has a bill. Senator Marsha Blackburn has a bill. And you point to those bills saying, let's pass those.
This is what has set, and obviously, listen, so I don't, because there are good think tanks doing good work out there. And let's be really clear about this. But in terms of folks who come out of government and start organizations, let's say former candidates who start organizations, the substantive work that AAF is, AAF. Sorry.
No, you got it. And there's a few AAFs out there, right? Yeah.
Is there? So advancing, but the substantive work that American Freedom, Advancing American, it sets it apart from the other organizations because it is substantive in nature. It is backed up by good, solid research. It's again, great think tanks that are out there doing great activist work. I think about, my colleagues at the Competitive Enterprise Institute.
Absolutely.
But in terms of, again, the offshoots that come out of these political, by contrast, right? Let's contrast this with the former vice president, now president of the United States, Joe Biden. He had a think tank with what was called the Biden Institute, Biden Center, exactly. and no substantive work. Why talk about why this is important?
No, I really appreciate it. Yeah, because we are building a real and permanent institution for the conservative movement.
Sure.
This isn't something that is temporary that's going to get turned off. This is something that, God willing, is around way longer than I am on this earth. That's the goal, and we're building it that way by slow and steady growth. Not kind of all of a sudden we have 100 staffers and we can't afford it.
Sure.
We're just growing.
Not that I know any organizations.
No, but exactly. We're just growing it steady and strong. And for us, we like to say our name is our mission, right? Yeah. So everything is about advancing freedom, but it's also, we also look at it as kind of a past, present, future mode of operation.
Sure.
So past is defend the policy legacy
Right.
of the Trump-Pence years. So many fantastic policies. Present, beat back as hard as you can against the left. Schumer, Pelosi, Jeffries, Biden, Harris, you name it, trying to undo so many of those successes and stop conservative wins. But most importantly, what we do each day is the future. How do you build policies, coalitions, messaging, legislation for the future to earn conservative wins and bring freedom back?
It's interesting because with Institute for Liberty, which I ran for many, many years.
Oh, yeah.
Every once in a while, I get a wag who would say to me, "Oh, Institute for Liberty, how are there people out there who are against liberty?"
Yeah.
And I would say, "Well, actually
yes.
are." But talk about this because you get the same. I'm sure you get the same. Or some folks might have given you the reaction, "Oh, advance freedom. Who's against freedom? Who's taking?" But we are really at a point where we are making a choice between freedom
100%.
and disempowerment. Talk us a little.
Well, and that was actually
about that.
a lot of the impetus behind creating a freedom agenda, because part of what we're proud of in that too, it doesn't just kind of list policies and say, do this. It starts with, what is freedom?
Sure.
Why does that matter? Why is that important? And you're right, how it is slipping away. So many of our fellow Americans not only don't want it, they're willing to cheerfully surrender it. Just look at COVID.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
How many of our fellow citizens just said, take my freedoms.
Sure.
And by the way, you could give them back to me whenever you're ready. I'll just sit here and wait.
It's funny. I did an event years ago. There was a guy put together a transpartisan conversation about energy policy. Okay. It was 25 of us across the spectrum, and really it was 8 of us who were on the right, and then about 16 lefties. I mean, it was me and Fred Smith from CEI, Norquist, and on the other side it was Joan Blades from MoveOn.org and folks from the NRDC and Al Gore.
Fun.
And I found myself in a circle, and we're talking about what are your values?
Yeah.
What do you wake up? And I said, well, freedom for me is a core value.
Yeah.
And they were like, well,
what do you mean by
freedom?
that?
What do you mean by that? I said, well, when I wake up every morning, I think about how people can, become more free.
Yeah.
That's really what you're talking about here, which is this idea of, go ahead.
No, that's right. I was just going to say that, I think for us, the way we look at freedom is, how can more people make more of their own choices with more of their own resources?
Sure.
It kind of just boils down to that, if you think about it.
Sure, absolutely.
And yet, it's so controversial, right? There's a lot of Americans that do not believe that. You shouldn't have the choice to make more of your own choices. You shouldn't have the ability to keep more of your own resources. People should tell you what's the best use of your resources.
This is what I appreciate about what Advancing American Freedom is doing, is because it has massive, saying it has mass appeal, I think undercuts it. What it is it's a way of being able to sell. That's a bad way of putting it. Being able to advocate for these principles with constituent groups that may not have heard from these things before.
Yeah.
And by example, I don't know how involved you guys are involved in Second Amendment issues.
Yeah.
That's
part of it.
But to me, it always distills down to are these policies that empower people to act on their own behalf or disempower people. And,
exactly right.
Whether it's the Second Amendment or whether it's on an economic agenda, the work that our good friends at the Institute for Justice are doing that. But you guys distill all of these things, don't you?
Yeah, exactly. We try to get involved in really any issue that is of the moment.
Yes.
Like I was saying, we're a relatively small shop, about 14 or 15 of us.
Yeah, but that's...
So, you can't touch every issue every single day at all levels of government. But for the most part, we're trying to be that generalist shop that plays wherever the sound of the guns is to do the pun.
Yes, it's little platoons. I don't remember who said little platoons. It's the phrase my buddy Jerry uses all the time.
Exactly.
I want to say it's Chesterton, but it may vary. Well, anyway, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to butcher it either way, and I'm sorry, Jerry. I apologize. But I mean that's and it's so vital. So you guys are obviously keeping track of what the administration is doing with a mind towards what happens next, regardless of what happens next.
Oh, yeah.
This is part of it, right? I mean,
absolutely.
Where do you see the biggest threats coming from at Advancing American Freedom?
Yeah, no, in fact, that's something that leads into a nice little plug. Yeah. We have this thing we call the Biden Accountability Tracker, or the BAT.
Yeah.
It's on our website, advancingamericanfreedom.com. Easy on a tab to find on there. Yeah. And we're trying to make it as comprehensive as possible.
Sure.
I'm sure we've missed a few things. Please, for your listeners and viewers, if you see something we missed, tell us. Yeah. But we're trying to track every horrible thing that the Biden-Harris administration has done to reduce freedom in America. So that could be signing a certain bill, that could be implementing a regulation, giving guidance to a certain number of bureaucrats to do X, Y, or Z, whatever it is. We've got it there, so you can look it up and use it in your speeches, in your radio hits, in just even your conversations with family members at Thanksgiving coming up, and you want to be armed with some horrible things the administration has done.
Everybody has a niche. It's important. Every organization has that niche. Let me ask you this. I don't think you and I talked about this last time you were on. So you came out of college. We did talk about this. You came out of college. You worked up on the Hill, but you were also getting your PhD at the same time.
Right. Yeah. Well, I didn't get to the Hill until after grad school, but I was working at the same time as grad school. Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah.
But my point
Different
is,
political groups.
You went to, so you were outside. Got it.
Yeah.
Which will then get to my question, which is, you went up to the Hill, worked on the House side, worked on the Senate side, you went into the administration. Total of like 28 years?
No, on the Hill itself or government total?
Government total.
Government total has been about 20 . And I say about, it's just shy of 20. So
you never hit your 20.
I was going to say, I got to go back for 3 months or something, right? That's right.
We have good friends who've done that.
Yeah.
Gone back up. But my point in asking this is, you're now out on the outside doing the advocacy thing.
Yeah.
What's the difference for you in terms of outlook, lifestyle? I mean, how do you like better? Not that I want you to make a choice, but I want you to make a choice.
No, exactly. I mean, look, I'll be honest. It's a fantastic post-White House job that we're in.
Sure.
We're to build something, to still be able to be involved in policy and coalitions and messaging and legislation, things like that. But I tell you, there are times I miss being in the actual arena instead of just kind of trying to influence the arena. Being in the arena, I think is something I miss. Having said that, to be able to maybe have shorter days in the office because you don't have these 12-hour marathon sessions on the House floor, or you're just not a White House staffer where that place never really shuts down. There's moments I appreciate that too. Absolutely.
Do you still get a little misty-eyed when you get out of your cab or your Uber or step out of the metro and you see that Capitol Hill dome?
Oh, no question. Yeah. No question. Still take pictures of it if the light's hitting it in a cool way.
Yeah, you gotta.
It's hard. It's hard to lose. And White House too. Even though I hate thinking who's in there now and what they're doing, but if you're at, let's say, the Hay Adams Hotel right across from the White House, rooftop looking down the White House, just no better view. And does make the throat clear a little bit.
I need to get up there a little more because I haven't been to the bar at the top of the Washingtonian.
Oh, right.
Hotel Washington.
Hotel Washington.
And I want to get that right because
that's another great
one. Know the GM over there. So, I'm just going to throw you another curveball.
Okay.
A Republican wins in 2024.
Okay.
Could be Vice President Pence, could be Donald Trump, could be. What is, by your mind, the most important thing that president can do on day one?
Oh, fantastic. That's a great question.
Thanks.
And I'll admit that, I don't have the beautiful ready answer,
no,
but
of course not.
But the summary answer, if you will, is go back. I would even pull out the Biden accountability tracker from Advancing American Freedom, and every single thing that you can legally and constitutionally undo that the Biden administration did that day one, undo it, which frankly, in many of those cases, undoing the Biden-Harris stuff just puts back in the Trump-Pence stuff.
It's one of those things where there's so much back and forth, which again gets into curing the dysfunction in Congress to sort of get Congress to take a stab at curing some of these things. Like, for example, one of the very first things that Biden did, one of the very first things that Trump did was he enacted his executive order on regulatory accountability and transparency.
Yeah, exactly right.
By saying you can't use what Wayne Cruz calls regulatory dark matter as with the force of law. One of the very first things the Biden administration undid when they came in, and now we have, as I knock over my phone, and now we have a regulatory state that's grown by about 33% since Joe Biden took office, which is crazy.
Stunning. It's just stunning. Right. So, like I said, some of it would have to go through Congress or a longer process, comment period, things like that. But something that we can legally, constitutionally do just day one of undoing some of the horrible regulations. And sometimes they just do guidance documents, like just letters
that's exactly
from OMB, Office of Management and Budget, out to a federal department. You could just put that in the shredder and say that's done.
Most folks don't realize that most of our regulation of wetlands comes under guidance, these wetlands delineation manuals that have never gone through the full force and effect. I'm sorry, I don't want to bore everybody with sort of my regulatory talk.
No, but actually something that, and this, again, it's minor in the big scheme, but it gives you the example of just how horrible these folks are. One of the things also that Biden did in that, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was that first month, January 2021, repealed the Trump executive order that said any new federal construction should also take into account beauty.
Sure.
How it looks. Oh, yeah. Classical architecture.
Yeah, of course.
They undid that.
That's crazy.
Who's against beautiful architecture? It's just amazing.
You think about it, right? I mean, most of the architecture in D.C. was from that brutalist school. And that brutalist school certainly came out of the progressive movement where art can be ugly. I mean, it's like who could be against freedom? Who can be against beauty? I mean,
and yet
who can be against truth? I mean, all of these things. It's all of these things are there.
It's amazing.
I know we've talked to you about some of your outside interests, Paul.
Okay.
Well, why don't you share with us again? What do you do when you're not working on this stuff? You and your lovely wife.
Well, one thing that we love to do, it goes back to what we were saying before, beach time.
Yeah.
We, love to take little trips, whether it be long vacations, quick weekend, that kind of thing. We love that.
Easier now in the new job, I'm sure.
A little bit easier, no question. And frankly, the better that technology gets in terms of you could be on all kinds of listservs and text threads and everything while you're sitting on the beach. It's almost like you're still working. Now, of course, you don't want to be working too much when you're doing a little vacation with your wife, but it also helps keep sanity to look down and say, okay, I'm not missing something that's completely
100%.
blowing up in our world, literally or figuratively. In terms of just kind of personal stuff, racquetball. I'm still playing racquetball, which I know is a sport from like the 1980s or something.
No.
But I still love that.
You haven't gotten into the pickleball thing? I mean, that's the next thing.
I haven't tried it.
And neither have I. But,
every person I mention I play racquetball to, they're like, gotta try pickleball.
You gotta try pickleball.
Absolutely. And then I've even gotten into not playing, but watching tennis. I'm suddenly into that. They say, you gotta try pickleball. So I'll probably have to try it at some point out of just shutting people up, frankly. But, so far I haven't tried that. So.
Are you, this is going to be the last question. You're not jaded enough yet where there are things that don't surprise you. I mean, are you at a point these days where things are not surprising? I mean, all of the chaos and upheaval, it seems, are we ever going to return to any sense of normalcy or is that left?
Right, or is this the new normal and we'll just have,
10
years from now they'll say, can't we just return to 2020, 2023?
Actually, let me ask you this. And again, not to cast aspersions on anybody, but because this came up in a recent podcast that I did, talking about chaos. And I think we are living in chaotic times.
Yeah.
And my colleague said, well, no, this is the way it just is. I said, well, just because it's been chaotic for the last 25 years doesn't mean it's not chaotic now.
Yeah.
Is this the new normal?
God, I really hope not. Because, for example, when you mention that, sure, there's political chaos. We could talk about that. And I'm sure some measure of that has existed all through our history, maybe all human history. But I feel like what's particularly new now is this biological chaos, meaning like men could be women, women could be men. You could be something in between. Men could go on girls' sports teams.
Yes.
Men go into girls' locker rooms, get naked, and it's the girls that are the problem.
Right, of
and
course,
how dare you be offended at
that's right.
the male genitalia? Like, that's the chaos that I think is not permanent. That I think that there's a snapback for that. That even our friends on the left, on the street, the average liberal, the average Democrat. Is like, what, like I may want, if I'm a liberal, I may want more government. I may want higher taxes on certain people. Do I want my daughter seeing, naked men in their locker rooms?
A case in point that I made to one of my own kids who was sort of talking about this transgender policy. I said, well, let's say you're playing soccer and all of a sudden you're no longer able to participate on your soccer team because some boy who's decided to be a girl's and she sort of, oh, that's really interesting. I never really thought about that.
Exactly.
It really gets into, I'm sorry, I know we're going to end on this, but, you had Tip O'Neill said all politics is local.
Yeah.
Gingrich said all politics is personal. It really is, isn't it?
No question. I think that's where we could win some non-traditional allies to our side through this, I hate to say it, biological chaos, right? I hate that we're even in this moment, but I think that's a lot of it, and
but also finding people through your future freedom agenda, and that's
trying to use issues and even language, like you were saying with the word freedom, that don't immediately turn off the other side. Maybe it brings them in, right?
Right, empowerment
just saying
an issue.
Like, hey, whether you're left, right, or center, don't you think that the girls' teams should be reserved for biological girls?
Absolutely.
Is that crazy to say?
There's a story that just came out about somebody did in swimming, I think, was create an actual transgender category, and nobody who was transgender wanted to compete.
Isn't that amazing? See, that's fascinating, because that's, I think, what'll start happening, because a lot of these teams, there may be one biological male on a female team. What happens when it's 2, 3, 5, the whole team?
That's exactly right.
Then that's a whole ball of wax.
It is amazing to me because a couple of weeks ago when I was driving into the city, I heard somebody, there is now a new talking point about this to try to dispel the myth that women who were born men, I'm sorry, I can't even, but people who were born men and now claim to be female, it's a myth that there's a biological advantage. Which is and the mental gymnastics that has to be done. It's just crazy.
It's crazy.
Paul, how do folks find out more about the good work you guys do?
Well, again, I appreciate anyone going to our website, advancingamericanfreedom.com. All the things we talked about are on there, and then some. We'd love your feedback as well. So
there we go.
Let us know.
Well, my guest has been Paul Teller. He is the executive director of Advancing American Freedom. I'm Andrew Langer, your host here at the Lunch Hour with Federal Newswire. As I say at the beginning, if you're watching us on YouTube, you can always listen to us on many of those fine podcast platforms. If you're listening to us, please go and check out our video. You can watch me drop my phone. But please, if you're doing this, leave a review, leave a thumbs up, or leave some kind of a rating, and let your friends know, your family members know, et cetera, et cetera. Have a great week, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your lunch.
This has been the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour Podcast, hosted by Andrew Langer. Check out the Federal Newswire's family of websites, as well as their social media stream.